All right, ladies and gentlemen, for this video, we're actually going to talk about our last organic macromolecule, and that is proteins. Now, we did say proteins for last because in some ways they are the most complex, and also because they could be considered the most important. It's kind of a loaded phrase. All organic macromolecules are important to living things, but the diversity of what proteins do really does sort of ratchet it up a notch. So first thing that we need to talk about is, like all organic macromolecules, proteins have a monomer. And that monomer is known as an amino acid. Now, it's important to realize that we frequently abbreviate amino acid as AA, because, you know, amino acid. So what you have right here is the structure of an amino acid. An amino acid basically has three pieces to it. It has something called an amino group, something called a carboxyl group, and then it has this section right here, which is different for each amino acid. So if you look at this diagram we have at the bottom, the R group right here is just a hydrogen atom. The R group right here is actually a complex chain of atoms, carbons and hydrogens and sulfur. The carbon group, the R group there is ammonia and carbon and hydrogen. And then the R group here is like a ring of carbons. And that's the thing that's most important about amino acids, is that the R group is different for each amino acid. Now, most living things use 20 different amino acids. And what's interesting is they generally use the same 20. Different amounts, different varieties, but different combinations, not varieties, but they definitely use the same 20. And what's awesome about this is because you use 20 amino acids, this creates extensive variety for life. Like extensive. Just think for a second about the English language. There's 26 letters in the English language and practically an infinite number of words. There's 20 amino acids. And proteins can be hundreds. Remember, we looked at cytochrome C when we were doing classification, and that had 112. They can be thousands of amino acids long. And that creates these huge, complex molecules, which is part of where we get macromolecule. But it just creates so much potential for variety. And that's why they're so important. So let's talk a little bit about the structure that contains this variety. So the polymer of a protein is known as a polypeptide. So hopefully you remember that poly means many. So of course you're like, well, why isn't it called a polyamino acid? The word peptide, and you see it written right here, comes from the connection between any two amino acids. And that connection is called a peptide bond. So you can see it right there. You can see it right there. Okay? And that peptide bond is what connects one amino acid to the other. So if I have 100 amino acids, I have 100 peptide bonds. And that's what makes us go with polypeptide, because a protein, or the polymer of amino acids, is when you have many peptide bonds connecting many amino acids. That's what we call a protein. And you can see down here, here's a physical example of it. All right? Right here you have an R group, 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 an R group. So here you have all these different R groups, and you can see how they all have different shapes. And hopefully you remember that structure equals function. And if you take a look here, you have a peptide bond. Here you have a peptide bond. Here, 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 here. All peptide bonds. So that's why this is a polypeptide. Because look at all the purple circles. That's many peptide bonds. Now, what's interesting about a polypeptide chain is that it actually folds. So this chain is actually right there. And it's got all those shapes from the R groups all spread throughout each other. And what happens is they actually fold into a very specific structure. And as we already said, structure equals function. So this sequence of amino acids creates this chain. But the amino acids cause the chain to fold. Folding is a structure which gives the protein its function. And that's the most important thing. The amino acid sequence gives the protein its structure. Structure equals function. In fact, the amino acid sequence gives the protein its structure. So let's talk a little bit about what those functions are that structure gives us. The reality here is that I can't tell you. I can't tell you because there's just too many. Proteins make up a key component of just about every structure in living cells. Your nucleus has proteins in it. The parts of your cell that read your DNA, proteins involved. Your cell membrane, proteins. Your mitochondria, proteins. Your chloroplast, proteins. Proteins are a key component of every structure in living cells. Your hair's shape, whether it's straight or curly, proteins. Your hair's color, proteins. Your eye color, proteins. All right, your muscles' ability to contract and allow you to move and interact with the world, proteins. And that's the thing. Proteins play a key role in every function in living things. And that means that the structure of a protein is one of the most important things in biology. Now, we do, and we will right now, focus on one specific example about what protein's function is. And that specific example is actually going to be what's known as enzymes. Now, enzymes are what's known as a catalyst for chemical reactions. Now, we're going to have another video on what catalysts and enzymes actually are because the details of that are important. But for now, a catalyst speeds up chemical reactions. Without catalysts, the chemical reactions that you require to live, the chemical reactions that you use to maintain homeostasis, they don't happen fast enough. And living things just don't survive. And so enzymes are one of the single most important protein structures in a living thing. Because without them, the chemical reactions that the living thing requires to survive won't happen. All right. That's our presentation on proteins.